can't think of a better officer and acquisition expert to lead one of these last panels of the day than Lieutenant General Todd. And currently he is still. Are you still the Deputy Commander of Army Futures Command?
That hadn't been fired yet. Yeah, I'm still here.
And so one of the most important initiatives in the Army to prepare the Army for the future battlefield, the Army Futures Command, and Lieutenant General Todd is leading that effort to infuse acquisition and business savvy principles across the entire Army modernization effort. And so it's a pleasure to introduce you, sir, and I'll give it to you as the panel chair, sir.
No, thanks so much. And thanks for the opportunity. I'm on travel, and that's part of, I'm sure, the technical difficulties, but certainly always glad to participate and very thankful for Naval Postgraduate School for putting this on. I'd first like to say thank you for joining us, to everyone, especially to our panelists, to the 19th Annual Acquisition Research Symposium, and specifically to panel 24, the best panel of the day, hopefully. This is a panel that we'll discuss as titled Modernizing and Assessing basically the acquisition business processes, which I love that discussion because part of my job is as an innovation officer for Army Futures Command is to look at structural business models. So we'll certainly be, diving into that deeper. But it's an honor to be here, and on behalf of the Army and Army Futures Command, glad to be here. I'll be chairing the panel. I'm joined by panelist Erin Carson from the U.S. Government Accountability Office. I'm joined by Gregory Sanders from the Center for Strategic and International Studies, and Spencer Brien right there at Naval Postgraduate School. So I'll start our conversation today. I believe we have roughly 70 minutes with some comments about the topic at hand. And I'll frame it around what I know, what I love to do, and what I've been doing a lot of my career. So I'll try to stay in my lane and not hypothesize too terribly much. Modernizing and assessing acquisition business processes. We don't hear acquisition business processes, that terminology, very much. As a matter of fact, I've been promoting business models throughout my career, and operationally, it's not well received sometimes in the military or the DoD realm that we actually do need business cases behind what we do, and there are structural business models that we could follow and learn from others. And I know that many of the panelists in particular have written greatly on this. One of the things that we're trying to do at Army Futures Command is create a team of teams and really get everybody aligned on the same types of, not just processes, but the same types of goals, the same types of problems that we're working together as multidisciplinary teams, working them all in simultaneity. And, that is a very tough task in DoD. So whether we can do it within the Army, whether we can successfully do it just inside AFC is already a very big question. We're 3 years plus along the way. We've already seen some great successes. I think we'll hear some of these ideas today reinforced by the panelists. And specifically, we'll hear, how to get after getting the whole of the government where we need them to be. Because this really does take all of us rowing in the same direction. And sometimes we're just not. Let's just be frank. Sometimes we're not. So I look forward to certainly, the discussions, and I look forward to all the great dialogue today. Hopefully we have some. Hopefully we don't have panel exhaustion by the end of the day today from those attending. But with that, I'll take a break here, and I'll turn it over to our panelists to introduce themselves and look forward to the further discussion. Over to you. I think maybe Erin might be up first.
Okay, hi, yes, I'm Erin Carson, and I am a senior analyst in the U.S. Government Accountability Office. I'm on our Contracting and National Security Acquisitions team, where I currently help lead our leading practices in product development work. And I'm happy to be here today to talk about our first report in this new body of work. This report we published in March. So I just want to give a quick word of context before I dive into the details about why we're even doing this. So as I'm sure you know, and many on the call know, that for over 20 years, we've been reporting on cost, schedule, and performance of acquisition programs at DoD, DHS, and NASA. And over that time, we've made really numerous recommendations that have been based on our prior work and leading approaches from the private sector. Many of these recommendations have been implemented, and we've seen really positive outcomes as a result of that. But obviously, you know, much has changed over the last 20 years in product development. Things have changed in the technology, things have changed in technology development methods. So this body of work is really aiming to refresh our legacy best practices to ensure that we stay relevant in how we analyze programs and the kinds of recommendations that we make to agencies and matters for consideration for Congress. So just jumping in, this first report examined at a really high level the key principles that guide leading companies for product development and really what enables them to go fast, and I'll get at that in a minute. And then we compared these principles with DoD, DHS, and NASA's department-wide and primary acquisition policies. So to do this, we interviewed management representatives from 13 leading companies that reflect a variety of different industries with a range of different product types applicable to agencies in our review. This list is available on the slide deck that's on the MPS website, but I am just going to go ahead and rattle off those companies for you now because I think it's important to understand where we even derived these principles. So we met with Amazon, Carnival, Director, GE Renewable Energy, Gulfstream, IBM, Kiewit, Merck, Planet, Qualcomm, Siemens, SpaceX, and Virgin Orbit, and as well as others in industry, think tanks, and other groups. And so we focused on the product development activities that mirror major acquisitions as a part of these conversations. So everything from system development through testing, manufacturing, and delivery. We intentionally did not drill into the R&D efforts and conceptualized early efforts on thinking through what types of products to pursue. And then using this information, we identified the common principles and sub-principles that enable these companies to successfully deliver their products to meet user needs. And so like I alluded to, the key bottom line for leading companies really is delivering with speed. And I think, you know, we've heard over the past 2 days, and I think everyone can agree that that's not just for industry, that really is an imperative within government, you know, delivering capability to the warfighter at the speed of relevance. And DHS and NASA have their own speed imperatives. So we really wanted to understand from these companies how they're able to do this. And so we distilled these 4 key principles. And before I get into the principles, just a note that we do acknowledge in our report, and I'll say it here too, that the speed to market calculation varies for different industry types. So we're not saying that speed equals a 6-month delivery, you know, for every single type of hardware and software product. Delivering cloud computing code for software development at Amazon Web Services is obviously going to look different than a development for a pharmaceutical at Merck. But the emphasis within each of these companies is still on delivering new products on a schedule that's needed to meet customer needs and to do so before their competitors can. So these are the 4 principles that, that we distilled. And so taken together, this is what allows them to do this, to deliver their products quickly and achieve their desired outcomes. So these are attaining a sound business case, using an iterative design approach, prioritizing schedule, and utilizing customer feedback to inform improvements. So I'll walk through each of these principles at a high level and try and provide some examples of where we heard this being done by the different companies we met with. We do go into great detail in our report, so I'll put in another plug for that. So the first principle is to attain a sound business case that is informed by research along with collaboration with customers. And you know, this is something that's really done throughout development within these leading companies. So several examples of how this plays out with these companies. So Qualcomm is a semiconductor company that creates integrated circuits and system software. So it's the hardware software hybrid approach here. they really invest time up front to research their product and conduct extensive initial engineering efforts. And then based on these efforts, they refine their cost estimates based on what they're learning from this initial engineering. And then they provide the funding, not all at once they have that initial estimate, but really it's commensurate with the demonstrated progress that they're able to show as a result of this initial engineering. And then only when it makes sense to do so do they actually ramp up their funding. And this early work that they do is done in close collaboration with the actual end users. So for companies, that would be their customers. And another great example of this, and this is sub-principle 2 on soliciting early feedback from customers, is at Amazon. So at Amazon, everything starts with the customer experience, and then they work backward from that point. So once they know what the customer needs, they create these press release and frequently asked questions documents. And basically, they have to prove that the technology has to exist in some way in order to serve the customer. And then once they do that, they focus on making a product that addresses that very specific initial need. Leading companies build their estimates based on institutional shared knowledge. So products aren't considered in a vacuum. A great example of this is at Kiewit. Kiewit is a construction company, and they developed an in-house software solution that utilizes artificial intelligence to look across past projects and many times very diverse projects that they've built over time. And then they're able to continuously project what the current project that they're working on will cost and how long it will take. And so in addition to building sound cost and schedule business case, another part of building these estimates is setting up high-performing and autonomous teams to do the work. So this is really the example of a culture of ownership. You know, at SpaceX, we mentioned in the report that individual engineers are given these large amounts of work and ownership. They say that every engineer is a systems engineer because they have to coordinate with the engineers of other subsystems. And so this approach really creates a culture of ownership. You know, it's also the agile principle of a cross-functional team. So instead of being siloed and checking different functional capabilities at the very end during verification testing, they're really able to test as they go. And that allows for these diverse perspectives and creative collaboration and innovation early in the process. And this continuous evaluation is really what allows companies to ensure that they do have a high level of confidence before committing to a public release date, because they know that if they commit to a public release date and they're not able to make it, they run the risk of losing customer support. This also is what allows companies to fail fast. So leading companies recognize that when there is no longer a business case, you know, that's the time to terminate the product if that's needed. So Siemens uses a suite of tools to track performance, and they're able to see really every component of development and to track possible problems and warning signs. And then if the product overall becomes non-viable, and that's often due to rising internal engineering costs, then they may decide to terminate the product. Other companies said that, you know, other factors could include things like changes in the user needs. As they've been going through this initial engineering process, maybe the market has changed, maybe other technologies have entered and have taken up that market share. So at that point, they may decide to terminate, or they may decide to iterate on some other pre-existing technology. And that really ties into the second key principle, to use an iterative design approach that results in minimum marketable products. So this term minimum marketable products has been called different things by different people, both within industry and within government as well. You know, it might be called a minimum viable product. Amazon kind of famously calls it a minimum lovable product. So it's not just viable, it's lovable. It's a product that will appeal to customers and be something they'll value. But that really is the point, that this is the first release of capability that provides actual value to the customer. And then it's followed by subsequent releases of capability. So it's really something to think of as the starting line, not the finish line. And then the company collects feedback from that release to inform the next release and so on. And this is done for both hardware and software efforts. Agile development approach, as we all know, it originated and is often used in software development. And we did talk with IBM about how they incorporate Agile into their software development processes. But Agile is also increasingly being used for hardware approaches as well, even if that's in a somewhat modified form. So one example here is SpaceX. They follow an agile development process to develop their launch vehicles, so something pretty hardware intensive. And they said that instead of wasting resources by locking in all of these individual requirements up front, that they actually learn more by building an approximation than just by thinking about the product or putting something down on paper. And so, obviously iteration in hardware is going to be a different kind of lift than iterating on software code or something intangible. And so the way that these companies are able to iterate on hardware is largely made possible by using modern technologies, powerful computing tools like digital twinning, other types of digital engineering, simulation environments, 3D printing, additive manufacturing, AI, and there's others as well. And so in that SpaceX example, they use end-to-end 3D modeling to view and simulate their entire assemblies, and then they can automatically print parts. So they basically can take the concept from what's in someone's mind, translate that into a 3D object, and then be able to make it real and test on it just by printing it. Kind of the famous SpaceX test, destroy, learn, right? GE Renewable Energy is another example. They digitally build a wind turbine before putting it into production. So the machine head on a wind turbine has about 1,300 parts to it. So by being able to digitally engineer this and create a digital twin, GE is able to identify potential design problems and then figure out how to resolve them prior to actually producing all those parts. And then similarly, Gulfstream has the ability to use 3D printing. They also have these high-powered computer simulations where they put the users and the engineers and the designers all in the same room with the same simulator, where they're able to test out designs in real time and figure out what works best and what to prioritize. And that ties into this third principle, which really, the third principle ties into the decisions that are made during that iterative development process, because this is really about prioritizing schedule by off-ramping the capabilities that aren't critical to users in order to get the critical capabilities into the hands of the users on time. So in other words, leading companies emphasize delivering some capability to their customers sooner rather than delivering higher capability or all the bells and whistles, all at once. And they can do this because they know that they can improve on that capability later because they're using that iterative approach. So this involves periodic reviews throughout product development to make sure that development stays on course. Merck has oversight committees for all their products as they move through the development process, where they monitor effectiveness and safety. But really, beyond just monitoring performance, these reviews also have to include the difficult decisions to maintain that schedule. And I think this is where a lot diverges from what we see in companies and government. These decisions are based on realism versus optimism. So companies recognize when they need to adapt and embrace changes when needed. And a lot of this is possible because the scope isn't fixed. They know that they're able to adapt as new information becomes available. One example of this is at Gulfstream. So Gulfstream prioritizes its set production schedule. And in order to do this, in some cases, they said they might have to make trade-offs between keeping that schedule and some of their new product features. Obviously, that's subject to safety and quality, but they're willing to forego some technological innovation if that's needed for the sake of meeting their product release deadlines. Siemens is another example. They told us that their production schedules are set to first address the features that are most critical to their customers, and then they use agile development techniques to measure prioritization and reprioritization of all the features, and then they off-ramp features if it turns out that they might not be critical anymore to the customer. And at Qualcomm, once they commit to the schedule is the priority. Schedule is king. And so they said that, if they identify some features that present a risk to delivering customer priorities to meet that schedule, then they may have to address those features in the next delivery iteration instead. And they said that this decision might be very difficult. The engineers are wedded to these technologies, management is wedded to these technologies, but that ultimately it helps to ensure the ultimate superiority of the product. They said that good enough on time is preferred to perfect but late. And this is really where Principle 4 comes in. The leading companies we spoke with established a process for ongoing user engagement after each release, so not just once, and then they actually incorporate that feedback into the next iterations of development. So really every company we met with talked about this, but just a few examples here. Amazon builds customer support into its product plan, and then they consider product support and product maintenance really all the way through development. They have a product management team that meets with customers to get their feedback after the release has been made, to talk about what types of features they want during the next product development. They said that a product launch at Amazon isn't the finish line, but it's the starting line. So it kind of captures that theory there. And then Gulfstream has multiple customer engagement teams that focus on customer experience after aircraft delivery, and then they feed this into the next iterations of those aircraft. Carnival uses scorecards and focus groups after cruises to determine what features they'll put on their future cruise ships. And then Director also tracks client feedback after each ship is launched, and they incorporate that feedback into new projects and development. So I know I'm probably running low on time, but just a few words here on the application of these principles to the agency policies we reviewed. So we evaluated DoD, DHS, and NASA department-wide acquisition policies to determine the extent to which these policies incorporate leading principles and sub-principles. And you can see from the slide that we found that the agency policies implement some parts of these principles, but they've yet to fully implement others. And we noted in our report that this gap is really what limits the agencies from ensuring that they have a consistent approach to developing and delivering products with speed and efficiency. I think it's important to note that we did meet with senior management officials at all three agencies really multiple times throughout the engagement. And officials really did endorse the applicability of these principles. In fact, they said that they're often already employed in practice. They just might not yet be enshrined in policy. And so, we maintain that these principles are important to be in policy because it ensures the most consistent application across the widest number of acquisition programs. So just a quick word on the DoD scores there on the left column. At a high level, one of the reasons why we were able to give that partially implemented score to a number of the sub-principles and then the full principles was because the new software acquisition pathway policy does contain many of the principles and sub-principles. So for example, it requires acquisition programs to update their cost estimates and software data reporting all the way from the planning phase throughout the execution phase. It requires programs to use small and empowered teams, to use modern tools to iteratively deliver software, and to solicit and incorporate feedback from end users. So we did make 9 recommendations to DoD, DHS, and NASA, and all of the agencies concurred with our recommendations. And then my last slide, finally, I'll just mention that we recently did begin work on 2 follow-on engagements to identify the specific metrics and indicators on a principle-by-principle basis that leading companies use to make these sorts of decisions. And we're very early in this process, but we plan to look at the metrics and measures that are used during iterative design, including specific design tools and approaches, and metrics and methods for soliciting user feedback and making those capability prioritization decisions. So thank you, and I'll go ahead and turn this back over.
Thanks, Erin. Thanks so much. Great job. Good to see you. Very nice to meet you. Gregory, over to you.
Thank you. To look at business models for innovation in a modular open system environment. So the purpose of this is to get the sense of industry views on MOSA and the challenges it poses to their business case. Our approach was a variety of in-person interviews with industry partners, so 16 of those, and other experts, including NPSs for neighboring quantitative surveys of other industry opinions. And this was made possible by the Vertical Lift Consortium that sent our survey out collectively. Focused interviews, self-government, officers within the Army. So that was 10 people, so the ability to extrapolate from that is unlimited. And then a follow-on survey targeted at product line and profit and loss managers. So 7 and 14 surveys there. And a comparison group that were in neither category. Product line and profit and loss managers were chosen for being a relatively skeptical audience for modular open systems. So why did we undertake this research? The short version is that modular open systems approaches offer a variety of benefits to the government and also to industry partners, but they also can make substantial changes to existing business models, changes that might make participation potentially appealing. And our government sponsors have found that they were not always able to solicit feedback on what models might work best, or like often because they were doing so in an environment where industry felt the customer is present or the competitors are present and they're really low to speak. So we identified 4 key areas of focus: demonstrating government commitment, intellectual property and data rights, extent of modularity, source of division, and the acquisition toolkit itself. So elaborating a little bit on some of these slides. For some of these, I'm showing the comparison group, the original group, and the target group. The target are those 60 interviews I mentioned at the start. So the original group are 60 interviews. The target are the smaller group of product line and profit and loss managers that, as this data shows, are a bit more skeptical towards MOSA. In comparison, are a range of other respondents found in that category in the follow-up. So if it did not fall in those categories in follow-up. So we found the government commitment to modular open systems was very more favorably than government expertise. And we found 2 broad categories of respondents. Those who were MOSA embracers and those who were MOSA hesitant. A given company might have some people that fall in one category or the other, or even people that would fall in one category or the other, depending on the specific circumstance. But for our MOSA embracers, government commitment was particularly a concern. They would often be ready to make investments to adopt standards, would help develop them, and sometimes even looked at open standards adoption as perhaps their comparative advantage. But they're worried that the government would subsequently prioritize cost or schedule or another factor over modularity requirements. For those that were most hesitant, there's often more emphasis on expertise and greater skepticism. So we asked them about the appeal by stage, and most participation, R&D participation, and O&M participation had some of the greatest skepticism among the target population. Whereas in the comparison group and the original sample, most were quite happy to participate. And I think the reason for that is relatively straightforward and well understood. Companies are often willing to bid competitively at the R&D stage, in part with the intention of making that money back in later stages, operational sustainment. However, modular open systems offers the possibility of either greater government control for upgrades, potentially bypassing original design, or potentially outright recompeting the operational sustainment. So the potential profit margins of those later stages are no longer guaranteed. And so both the O&M stage and the R&D stage have a potentially different business model. We then ask about a variety of possible considerations and how they affect the appeal. So one of them was subsystem parts across multiple contracts. So that's kind of commonality. Are multiple platforms within the same portfolio using this part? Or the holy grail of is it being used across different services? Competitive bids throughout the lifetime. That one is a bit positive, but as you'll see in the target group, there's a bit of red in that second row. The appeal there is potentially strong, that the competition means that even if you or a company doesn't win that initial competition, you're not locked out for the life of the project. You can come in and bid for modular upgrades, or maybe again, possibly bidding for the project itself at a later stage, depending on how it's structured. That said, we found, particularly in the target group, There can sometimes be relatively strong loss aversion. The main vendors think that of themselves as contract winners, potentially, first and foremost, and are more worried about winning and then only gain some of the benefit than losing, but having the opportunity to potentially participate later. Increased time to return on investment is, of course, strongly positive, and to a degree that can be achieved, even a target group becomes very positive. And the greatest skepticism was on government purchase of IP and data rights. We didn't include purchase here. So the idea was the government paying upfront for more IP and data rights. But even with that explicit statement, that was an area of some concern for industry. So on our first category, demonstrating open system adoption is a coordination problem. But both in government and in industry, many of the benefits only come with widespread adoption. So the most hesitant want to know priorities for MOSA, and that is often part of their way of saying, we think that this particular bit of IP data rights aren't necessary for MOSA, and if we know your priorities, we can make that argument. The MOSA embracers, the chief concern is the government would defect from MOSA commitments, and the variety of existing mechanisms, including cross-border feedback that can potentially help some technical challenges and business challenges. So on IP and data rights, a key message we heard was concern that government wants it all. And this was strongest perhaps with source code, where some of the recommendations of the swap, which suggests the government has access to source code for a variety of cyber and other reasons, raised hackles, though licensing approaches potentially offered a solution to that. And this ultimately reinforces the literature that for modular open systems, the way to potentially square the circle on IP data rights is that companies get to hold close IP data rights within their particular module, but the interfaces remain open, and those are places where the government will pay or pay to develop, or potentially adopt commercial standards. But a key caveat here is that the business model impacts interfaces and architectures. If you design a MOSA architecture that has greater modularization, so for example, a higher level of modularization might be a radar, a lower level might be sort of a transmitter and receiver within that radar. There are potentially more concerns about interfaces, that some companies might be very comfortable with that high level large module, and other companies might feel they need the more detailed breakouts to have a chance to compete. Otherwise, they might feel they don't see the benefits of MOSA. So we asked about standards and interfaces, and here was really hammered home the point that cross-platform commonality was really key. This even more of an ability to compete later, because cross-platform commonality means that it's worth paying the transaction cost of adopting a new standard, and it's much easier to make a business case. So as Erin discussed, I think if you're thinking about business cases, the number of potential unit sales is vital, and the more platforms a module could be used on, the easier it is to make that case. We also did find that adopting commercial standards and it was seen as desirable, but there's a fair amount of emphasis on the need to get cybersecurity right up front, particularly among the most hesitant who might sometimes argue that more traditional mil-spec standards are needed, well, even if going as close to commerciality as possible. And so for this, enterprise mechanisms are a good investment, because ultimately for many programs, achieving commonality and the sacrifices, sometimes to size, weight, or power, or just cost of schedule to get that commonality, are not worth it for that program alone. But at the larger PO level or various other enterprise levels, the benefits can be seen. So that's a case where some of the portfolio management or some of the things that Army Futures is doing for Army PO aviation, we're trying to do to potentially address some of those problems, because ultimately the individual contracting officer doesn't quite have the right incentives, even if the heart's in the right place. So once cost and schedule problems arise, they might need that reinforcement from leadership. And finally, we looked at the acquisition toolkit. So for this, industry emphasized situational appropriateness. There wasn't a, go to OTA, that'll solve all your problems, or any other one size fits all answer here. Versatility is important, and one of the potential advantages of MOSA is that a separate business case, this works a little better under OTA, but there are ways to do it, could be made for each vendor. One vendor might care more about the certainty of the eventual number of deliveries. One vendor might have some more IP and data rights concerns or the like. But ultimately, achieving an open system will require certain hard requirements on the amount of openness and data on interfaces and some gray box aspects of a module, enough that you can have some degree of replaceability. And that is something the government cannot sacrifice on. So the point of the acquisition toolkit is to make the trade-offs necessary to help close that business case while retaining the core components needed to keep the openness. Software licensing was given a great deal of attention here. And we further asked about royalties and approach, which was raised by some of the vendors in the first round. And that was an area where even our more MOSA skeptical audience thought that the ability to potentially receive benefits. One example here might be that the company that did the original interface design receives a payment every time a new module is interfaced into that interface successfully. That's not a traditional contracting model, but it does mean that the company has a reason to maintain a long-term interest in success and to invest in getting the architecture right, even if they're not going to be the ones necessarily implementing. And ultimately, a diversity of models can help round out the problems. But this mix is going to be demanding of the acquisition workforce. In summary, we saw a division between MOSA heads and MOSA embracers, demonstrating commitment credibility, MOSA accept trade-offs of acquisition priorities, and that will mean higher upfront cost in particular. And one key point here is that often industry is hearing the right things from higher level leadership, but their concern was whether that message had reached down to the implementers at the more line officer level. And that's one area where both expert support or just a sense that leadership has their back, so that when a couple of years down the line, it's a question of, well, why didn't you get this IP data rights? They can give a firm and competent answer rather than feel they should have just grabbed everything they could, because when policy changed, then they're better suited to cover. And that ultimately, this is going to involve both technical and business trade-offs. And the sweet spot will vary between business units, but industry, particularly the most hesitant, want to know what the underlying logic is. And finally, creativity on acquisition toolkits will help with the diversity. And software and commercial technology require special attention. But I think there's a lot of room for potential innovation on approaches there. Not necessarily just OTA, but possibly through various IDIQ mechanisms. So thank you. Thanks to the fellow panelists. And Todd, I look forward to questions after that.
Great. Thank you, Greg. Thanks so much for that intro. And we look forward to some Q&A, certainly. So now I'll turn it over to Spencer Brien.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you to the other panelists for your interesting presentations. Now, this paper or this presentation covers some research that I did with two of my graduate students here at the Naval Postgraduate School. And this research looks more broadly at the environment that acquisitions and procurement occurs within, and focuses specifically on the way that continuing resolutions impact negatively procurement activity. As a way to, and the study is seeking to measure these impacts and to provide some more empirical evidence of the disruptions that are caused to help us understand these impacts more clearly. So just to give you a little background on continuing resolutions, this is the action that Congress takes to avoid a government shutdown when a full appropriation bill has not yet passed. There are usually percentages of spending that are allowed during a continuing resolution that allow for programs that were funded under the prior year's authorization to continue, and that spending can go forward on a percentage-based formula of the prior year spending on those programs. But there are also a variety of legal and administrative restrictions that come into play when these are triggered. So for service contracts, for say severable activities, these can only last for the duration of the continuing resolution. And so this creates new kind of duplicative work for contracting professionals to either line up incremental financing for a given award, or they may need to go back and re-award new contracts. No new programs or line items may be initiated, and that can be problematic for, say, agencies like NASA, where if you have a multi-year project that enters into new phases and you want to kick off a new phase of this program in the next year, but we're under CR status, and so only the line items that existed in the prior year can be initiated. And then you can have agencies that, because of the risk involved with the uncertainty of what the final budget allotment will be, they can issue directives, aside from what's legally mandated, but administratively, you can have conservatism within government spending to minimize spending, to only do what's absolutely necessary, and put off spending that can be put off until later in the year when the full budget authority is allowed. And this may also inadvertently change the nature of the spending. When we start delaying spending out, we may be in a position where, well, now we have to execute this remaining portion of our budget in a much shorter timeline than it initially been planned for. And that may not be feasible, but we may need to pull some money to other projects or programs that can execute that budget authority. So, there's been some research on, the ways that, the CR creates uncertainties and changes, fiscal behavior, but much of it has been interview based, and there is some need in this literature to have some more measurement of the size of the effects. And so that's what this study and my research program has been looking into, is can we quantify and measure some of the effects of agency level operations caused by continuing resolutions. So just a graphic to show kind of the the frequency of these. This is fiscal year 22, so I just updated this recently back to 03, and the length of this continuing resolutions of the period in each fiscal year that we were under CR in days. And then these slash boxes are the government shutdowns. Now I will note that, for the most part, the defense and non-defense spending years are the same, but FY19 was interesting, and that was the year where the defense appropriation was split from, it was passed at a different time than the non-defense appropriation. And this is where the non-defense discretionary agencies had the largest shutdown, or longest shutdown in recent history, whereas the defense budget actually had no shutdown or no CR that year, and the defense budget was passed on time. And that will come back as an interesting thing that helps our quantitative analysis later. So I think I've already covered these in kind of talking about the ways that CRs can impact procurement. But this highlights three of the things we're going to be looking at in this analysis. So it may reduce the quantity and the size of purchase requests. It may increase the review period for new purchase requests. And it may reduce the number of requests initiated during CR period and might delay some of that spending and purchase request activity to later in the fiscal year. So again, I'm going to reiterate that what we're looking at is actually very early in the acquisitions life cycle, before an award has been made. But when the end user or the warfighter is identifying a need and initially putting that into some kind of purchase request system so that it can be reviewed, vetted, and then ultimately then go into the acquisition system so that an award can be made. And so we're going to look at the impacts of a CR in this early phase of procurement. So we test three hypotheses. First, during a CR, fewer requests are initiated. Second, this early time period purchase request development will be lengthened. And third, that the average dollar amount of purchase requests would be diminished due to that cost and efforts to minimize spending during that period because of the uncertainty about what the final budget allotment would be. So what do we do? So we worked with the Marine Corps' Purchase Request Builder office and their database to receive a random sample of purchase requests across 4 years. And so from 26 to 2019. And 2019 is important for analysis because that's the year we didn't have a CR. And so it gives us a counterfactual of what our measures might look like were a CR not present. Additionally, the continuing resolutions were of different lengths in each of the 3 years, 16 through 18. And so that also gives us some variation in some times where you have a CR on a given month in 1 year, but no CR on that month during another year, and to be able to compare what procurement activity looked like in those periods. And also we're looking at wholly purchase requests for items under the simplified acquisition threshold. And this is done to make sure we're looking at a good comparison group with similar processes for reviewing those procurement activity, those purchase requests. If you go above the simplified acquisition threshold, that introduces new reviews, new types of, it's a different administrative process for reviewing that. So we kept it to these relatively smaller purchase requests. And so all in all, for these 4 years of data, we ended up with a usable sample of 1,074 unique requests spread over this period. And so we had a variety of data on these requests. So when they were created, when they were ultimately accepted into the system to develop an award or to seek a bid, the total dollar amount, some data on whether they were goods or services, and that's something that we examined. And then also we had some data on the officers that were actually handling the requests. And so we had both the supply officer and the reviewing official. And so we were able to control for those individuals to take into account talent or skill of those officers, and also whether some types of requests may have been pushed to certain reviewing officials. So somebody may be doing all the utility bill requests, or somebody else is doing a lot of the IT work. And so we're controlling for those individuals. This just, again, is a graph to highlight that we're looking at this purchase request acceptance lead time at the early stage prior to, well before award, but prior to this PALT period that's typically tracked when we're evaluating acquisitions activity. So this is from the need being established and up to the point where it's accepted into the procurement system. Because what we see is often someone will put in a request and it might get kicked back to the end user because there may have been insufficient information, or they need to redo the paperwork before the request can actually be accepted. Okay, so just some more data on our sample, what it looks like. So we have these 1,074 requests, 396 were goods, and 678 were services. Now, among those, when we look at, we categorize as whether they occurred during a continuing resolution or when they were created during full budget authority. And this is differentiated by what week the purchase request was created. And so we look at some of the details on these. So say the length, so this prompt length in days, the time from submission to acceptance for services took an average of 101 days during a CR and 65 days when we had full budget authority. For goods, across the board is a bit shorter, 47 days for a good and 30 days when we had full budget authority. So even just before we do any of the statistic, the regression analysis I'm going to show, the length appears shorter. The total price appears, for services, we saw services actually seem to be a little higher. So the total price of requests for services is higher when we had full budget authority, a little lower for goods when we had full budget authority. So we're going to systematically look at this a little later. But another thing that was interesting was we also have included in the model the number of adjustments and the number of times that the requests are kicked back in the system during the procurement process. So we use OLS and Poisson regression to first look at the count of purchase requests created by week during and outside of a CR. And then we use OLS regression to estimate the impact of a CR, the length of time to approve a request, and the total dollar amount of those individual requests. And we include a variety of controls, and particularly we're trying to control for the seasonality. We know that even outside of, if we take away the CR, there's still going to be some seasonality to spending, particularly the user lose pressures that tend to happen towards the end of the year. So we want to make sure that our results are not simply just capturing a seasonality effect, and that we are able to, with confidence, attribute what we're measuring to the continuing resolution. And so first I'm going to talk about these results on the count of purchase requests initiated per week when we're in and outside of a CR. And so what we're seeing in both the OLS and the Poisson regressions were very similar, yielding similar results. And what we see that across all orders, we were seeing about 2.3, 2.33 fewer requests initiated per week when we're in a CR versus when we're outside of a CR. And when we separate this out by our service orders and our goods orders, we see that this effect is about evenly distributed between these two, the 1.2 plus the 1.1, approximately, add up to this 2.3. And so we're seeing fewer requests initiated per week in this result. And this is after controlling for seasonality and the fiscal years that these were occurring within. And so we're seeing this relatively consistent result across our specifications that the CR is having a significant effect, reducing the number of purchase requests that are happening on a weekly basis. Now, when we look at the length of the review period, we are seeing the following. So if we don't include the seasonal controls, we see a statistically significant result where the review period's increasing for our base model and for goods by, for all purchase requests, about 23 days, for just the goods, about 32 days. But when we add in our seasonal controls, those our effect here loses its statistical significance. So what we're seeing is something that's suggestive that the CR is having the effect we would expect, but on the length of duration model, it's harder to, we're not seeing something that clearly separates from the seasonality effect. And so what we did do, however, though, to continue digging into this is we have some additional data that's not used in this set of results that we're able to break out services by different service class. And we were seeing some effects in services for electrical services. And so you see this interaction term between a CR and whether it's a good or service. This is significant in our season with the seasonal controls. And so this appears to be largely driven in our comparison with electrical services. So that may, be an anomaly where there is a larger effect on those procurement actions. Now, in terms of the dollar amount, the CR indicator on its own was not significant in either of our specifications, but the CR with the indicator for whether it was a good is significant. And, excuse me, I'm skipping ahead. And particularly when we look at these interaction terms, with all our seasonal controls, we're seeing, that there's this difference between goods and services in the dollar amounts that are actually requested during a CR period, and that the services appear to be less than the goods during a CR on average. They're having a differential effect. So what does this mean? What this work is doing is it's providing some quantitative measurement of the ways that the CR is affecting our procurement activity, and if we think about, okay, well, so what, as we try to measure this, and I'll just wrap it up with this. I think the so what is that we need to be able to communicate to Congress how this repeated budgetary dysfunction affects operational readiness. I mean, we saw that I'd heard rumors that the CR for this year could have lasted nearly all year as a way to slow down the Biden agenda. But as soon as the war in Ukraine really broke out, it had this other line of argument saying, look, we can't, move as a military to react to a changing world if we're, under these restrictions. And, that coincided with a lot of effort to really get that done. So with that, I'll close and look forward to discussion.
Great, thanks, Spencer. Thanks so much for that analysis and detailed, certainly look at CRs. We know they all have great impact, and no doubt we need to, I think, work on that hard each and every day together. We have a few minutes left. We did have one question that was regarding incentives, so I'll pose it to all of you. Really, given the areas that you covered. And we'll go back and start with Erin first. So Erin, it'd be very interesting to hear some of the incentives that you would think are common between for-profit businesses and government programs, or that we could adopt. I completely believe in some of the discussion that we had we are trying to implement better business cases, min viable products, and customer-centered design here at Army Futures Command. But I'm really interested in how do we incentivize to change, like the title of our panel says, acquisition business processes. And it seems like we need to create incentives inside the government to be able to do that. So any thoughts at all, Erin, from your perspective?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for that question. I think it's a good one. As I mentioned, I think the first commonality between industry and government right now really is that speed imperative. So a lot of the incentive behind the companies that we met with and in commercial industry is providing these products with speed. And, the certain environment that government is operating in right now, and particularly DoD is operating within right now, is to provide capability with that speed imperative. And I think that's something that has really ramped up, even with the release of the new 5000 series, making, kind of codifying that as a priority. So there is that speed incentive. You see that with the MTA pathway and this 5-year incentive to get the rapid prototypes out there within 5 years, to get things fielded quickly. So, there are certain structural, I think, incentives that the department has tried to put into place. But I think that there are also some larger cultural things that probably need to happen as well. Adapting an iterative approach requires making some of those difficult decisions in order to get prioritized capability into the hands of the warfighter quickly, and then to iterate on those capabilities as needed. So, while we're going to be looking in some of our ongoing work at what some of those very specific tools and metrics and measures could be, I think there are still ways that DoD can adopt similar practices. I think we heard that from all of the panelists that there's this need for the requirements process, the budgeting process, and the acquisition pathways to all work together in order to get there. And so programs really have to be structured in a way to adjust and iterate as a possible approach. Program managers need to be kind of incentivized to do things like fail fast. And right now it's really the opposite. Programs are incentivized to start quickly, and that doesn't necessarily comport with finishing quickly. So I'll go ahead and leave it at that, and for the other panelists to answer.
Yeah, no, that's really good. And I love the incentivized speed is one of the things we need to do for sure. I think you hit on one of the things there at the end, which is we need to be a learning organization all the time. And for some reason, we lock down these things called baselines. We lock down these things called configurations, and then we just all of a sudden stop and we produce whatever we locked down at that time, sometimes 5 to 8 years later. And that's by its very definition not learning. So, Greg, I'll pose the same to you. I think we have a few more minutes. I was particularly interested in cross-functional commonality, and you mentioned there's some benefits once we see commonality spread across multiple programs and multiple platforms. How do we incentivize both inside and out, to pursue that? Because it sounded like there's so much potential there.
So I think inside government, we heard a variety of ideas in our workshops and our interviews. One idea might just be to require a justification if you are choosing to not use an existing standard or interface option. So to make sure we look at. There's also a variety of steps that are being taken to make libraries available of what's already on hand. And so making everyone's job easier to take the open is definitely a key part. But I think also being able to clearly express if this is a priority and, to make it a high enough one that if someone has to sacrifice something else, this box is a slightly awkward size to fit in, or the like, that they can point to that and say, and this is requirements why I'm doing it. On the outside, I think that vendors, I think you might need to set up certain incentives to make sure that they are compliant with that standard, testing, et cetera. But industry gave us clear and strong signal that if this was achieved, that is almost inherent incentive for them, because I think that's why some of the, particularly on the engineering side, just see the beauty and love of MOSA, because they've put a lot of work in adapting to 5 different approaches to doing the same thing. They hate it. They see it as a massive waste of money, and they just assume not do it.
Sure.
And so I think that's one key part. And one other thing I'll say there, we've also seen some interesting international models. There was one case where a country used one of their national champions to set it up, including the third country integrator, allowing for third-party integrators. And part of the incentive there was that just having this national system and having them be one of the leading experts in that system and seen as a key integrator, even if their competitors were sometimes using it, was seen as a value. That said, it was also key if the government said, edge or do this or we'll walk, and this won't happen. So I think sometimes a little bit of a stick and some of the carrot is key.
Yeah, no, that's great. There are other incentives there for industry for sure. One of them for us internally is, you mentioned it in your discussion, is we're not locked in. So Spencer, I know we've got just a minute left. From your perspective, how do we incentivize what seems to be this ongoing habit of running to a CR each year? How do we incentivize getting away from that?
I mean, Erin, when you're speaking with SpaceX, can you imagine, or with Amazon, can you imagine saying, you know what, for the first 89 days of each year, don't roll out any new products, and consistently do that year over year, and just maintain a steady course from your prior year, and let your competitors know that through your consistent behavior. I mean, if I were China and I was going to roll out some disruptive activity, I would do it at the start of the fiscal year, and, when some things are slower, to be responsive, but I think more seriously, I think, there are efforts being taken by the DoD. GAO came out with a report earlier, or about a year ago, of some of the measures that are being taken to have incremental financing, to have planned out programs that, can clearly connect to prior year appropriations, so they're not hamstrung during that part of the year. So, I left the analogy at the end. If you live in Seattle, I'm from the Northwest, eventually learn to have some kind of an umbrella or plan for the rain. And I think if we're forward looking in our programming, we can expect there to be, these types of disruptions, but can we plan for them and develop our expenditure rates and our programs to minimize those disruptions?
No, that's great. Yeah. And we certainly, having been a PEO and a PM pretty much my whole career, we kind of got in that mode, right, where we had to do that. It's almost an accordion effect to our programs. So if our programs were a living organism, they're just not running smoothly. They could run smoother for sure. But yeah, thanks so much, Spencer, and appreciate the comments. To everybody, I think it's about the end of our time. And to Naval Postgraduate School, thanks so much for the opportunity for all of us to come on together. It's always great to get to see new people, new faces, and old faces too, and work together. I encourage you all to talk to us offline if you have any questions. Army Futures Command, I'm always available. And what we're doing, hopefully, with NPS to not only create a new culture but teach it. I think that's ever more important. And thanks to the participants to the panel today. Hope everybody has a great day.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.